and Development Coordinator. I'm pinch hitting for Michelle Gallagher today. She had a conflict with another meeting, so I'm sitting in her place today. Before we get underway, I'm going to turn things over to Barbara Teague, former Executive Director of COSA, to introduce to you our new Executive Director. Barbara?
Thank you, Anne. And everyone, since you signed up for this workshop on our new Executive Director's first day, and she is attending, you're going to be the first people within COSA to meet her. And she's Joy Banks. She's in my in my little grid. She's like halfway down on the left. I don't know where she is on your grid, but
give us a wave.
Wave to us, Joy, and say hi.
Where is she? Where is she?
She may not be able. Can you hear me, Joy? Anyway, you see her. She's got her beautiful quilts behind her. She may be having some sound issues.
She's in a bright
There she is.
blouse. Now she's smiling. Joy, can you hear us?
I can hear all of you. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, yes.
That's what getting all of these systems set up on a new computer is like. Yeah.
That's true. I was afraid you weren't able to hear when I said, there she is, and she'll wave at you. But we just wanted everybody to know that Joy is here today. So we're happy to have you with us, Joy, on your first day at COSA.
Yes, I am happy to be here too.
So the workshops today and next week that you're all a part of, we consider to be foundational elements for building or expanding cultural competency within your archives. When we developed the Building Archival Capacity for Keeping Electronic Records, also known as BACR, when we developed that project request to IMLS, it became clear to us that equitable public access to electronics was as important as having strong electronic records management and digital preservation programs and policies and plans in place. So thus, cultural competency became an important part of our current IMLS-funded BACR project. You received 4 readings prior to this workshop, and I hope that most of you have had a chance to explore at least some of them. There was a lot of material, so I'm under no illusion that everyone read everything, although if you did, great. Today's session is going to expand upon that material. And we hope that you'll share the readings with others at your archives. Perhaps they'll even spur or expand upon conversations among your staff. So we're delighted to have Helen Wong-Smith as our consultant to lead these workshops. And for those of you who don't know Helen, she's giving you the wave in front of the, the blue waters of Hawaii. For those of you who don't know Helen, you're going to find her to be an approachable advocate for your cultural competency work. So without any further ado, I want to turn the workshop over to Helen. Welcome, Helen.
Mahalo, Anne. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And I want to warn all of you, this is a lot of information. So let's see, I think I have the wrong display again. There how's that one? Okay, so, but don't panic, because you are all going to receive this PowerPoint with its links. And there's a lot of this grant was built so that there's a lot of follow-up. So what I'm going to be doing today is providing you with the basics and the foundational parts of cultural competency, and why it's so important for archival repositories. And the other part next week will be focusing a little bit more on the digital aspect and how it applies there. So if today you come away and goes like, well, how's that going to help me with my digitalization project? Don't panic, okay? But I do want to tell you that the survey that many of you took really plays heavily into cultural competency and preparing you on its application to satisfy or to embrace DEIA. And a lot of feedback has been like, why are you asking me such personal questions? I thought this is about my repository and how we can be more diverse. But it does start with you. So away we go. So numerous case studies and program initiatives and surveys promote the application of cultural competency or its related concepts like cultural appropriateness, cultural intelligence, toward the goals of increasing diversity, inclusion, and equity. And they're usually focused on increasing services to underserved populations or regulated to increasing underrepresented students in library programs. The literature on retention speaks of the lack of awareness of the white-centered dominance of the library and archival profession and how it impacts people of color. So why are we doing this? Because the profession is lagging. We're behind the in our efforts to address the foundational facets of racism and disparities. And here, although this is from the library field, it definitely applies to the archival field. And so, and even more so, I would argue. So this is a practice, a framework that is going to be very integral in creating a more diverse. And why are we doing this? Why am I applying this? And I want to share with you how this came about in the archival field. When I was on SAA Council, they were talking about the mega issue. And I'm like, I missed that memo. What are they talking about, mega issue? And they were talking about diversity. This is 2013. And I realized that it's such a large topic and with so many different interpretations. And, if you're ALA, great, you can have a whole office dedicated to that. But I said, what about taking a smaller bite out of this huge issue and applying the practice of cultural competency to achieve. It's a tool to achieve diversity. And they went, oh, okay, that's great. What is it? So I trained council and the staff, and they said, oh, that's great. Make a workshop. So this is something that I've been going across the country delivering specifically to archives, and then sometimes to museum and library audiences and as well. So while it's been incorporated into the medical fields, it basically came out of the medical fields and the fields of psychology and social work. They've been adopted by other disciplines and introduced more recently to the library profession. So as far back as 1999, John Berry said at the National Conference of African American Librarians entitled Culturally Competent Service to Women and People of Color, he said the idea of cultural competence library service is nothing new to librarians from the African American community or the many other ethnic and cultural constituencies in America. Yet true cultural competence has rarely blessed the librarian profession or even penetrated the professional consciousness. The existing body of literature provides support for the benefits of this approach, as evidenced by the dismal status quo of diverse workforce due to the white-centered nature both of the demographics of our profession, but as well as the Western viewpoint of professional endeavors. So despite such calls as IFLA's goals to address multiculturalism stated over the past 20 years, which includes combat racism among library workers and management, and to promote an enlightened approach to racial matters in the library services, the literature reveals a lack of efforts to address the first part of the statement. And then close to my heart are the facets of retention of professionals of color and other underrepresented cultures are varied, including microaggressions that they must endure and often manifested as a lack of recognition for their professional or academic efforts by predominantly white tenure promotion committees. And I realize you don't have tenure in the state archives, but even promotion activities. Recognizing the unbalanced onus placed on professionals of color in a homogeneous environment, there exists few avenues for them, or us in my case, to articulate these experiences and how they impact our decision to stay. So these are some of the reasons I think you will all agree that state archives are predominantly, if they're not predominantly Western or white workforces, especially the higher level that you go, or it's predominantly Western and Western culture based. And that exists in both our policies, our practices, our appraisals, every facet of archival profession. So what is cultural competency? Well, there are several definitions. This is the definition that I have selected. I feel that it's the most universal and applicable to the archival profession. So this is the definition I've chosen, and it should requires the ability to discern cultural patterns of not just others, but perhaps more importantly, of your own. So we tend to forget that we are cultural beings and often forget our own cultures are not universally shared. That's the hardest part, such as we're all Americans. We're all Americans. So we don't have to think about different cultures. Being culturally competent does not mean that you know everything about other cultures, but it does mean that you recognize difference and are curious about other cultures. So what I hope that you will, these are the learning objectives that we have today and next week. And then what I'd like you to realize is that culture values are rooted in ethnic, religious, and generational beliefs, traditions, and practices that influence both the individual and social values, and that it's learned, not inherited. We each have a choice to adopt or disregard what we have learned or continue to learn about our own cultural identities and how we choose to demonstrate who we are. So these are very personal things. This is not like learning EAD was like, okay, didactic instruction and you check up a box and I learned EAD, I'm all good, bye. No, this is very personal and requires a lot of introspective activities. So I hope that you will acknowledge your personal experiences, feel free in our dyad discussions to share those things that you probably don't share in other COSA activities that you may participate in. And the reason the survey was worded the way it was is that I do not give surveys that say, I value cultures unlike my own. Yes, no, something like, who's going to admit that? Who's going to admit that they are disrespectful of other cultures? No, that's not going to help you. So these are some of the things that I am going to ask of you to do today. So by definition, here's more definitions, but I'm including these so that you understand how it impacts the workplace. That sometimes it's not just stress, it's not, although that can definitely impact the workplace, but it's their values, their customs, how that they may react. And you say, well, what the heck was that? I don't understand why they were so offended by that. That didn't bother me. Well, you have to consider where they are coming from. So you probably have seen this this graphic before, but I like to put it up because too often when we talk about diversity, especially in the archival realm, we're just thinking of records. And so we're going to, okay, we're going to highlight this particular culture. And that's the other thing, is that we make the mistake of limiting ethnicity with culture. Culture can include many other facets of the human experience, and I'll be sharing that with you. But too often we look at the obvious things, the language, the literature, um, the food, okay? And we say, okay, we celebrated this culture. But when we interact with them, when we interact with other cultures, what are we taking in account certain things like notions of leadership, notions of fairness and justice, notions of cooperation and competition. That's a big one. You know, in our field, we usually, you don't enter archives to be if you have a competitive nature, usually. And in our last session, last month, with the first cohort, someone says, you know, she had to come to terms with a colleague who, she said, I'm so used to everyone being cooperative and collaborative, and this person is competitive. And I remember when the first time I went to ALA, and I was like, oh, all librarians are just so helpful and sweet and kind. And I went to ALA and I saw somebody being very rude to the person behind the desk, which is a no-no to me because I was a service person. And I just went, oh, it can't be a rude librarian. So, you know, sometimes you actually have a competitive archivist. So be aware of that particular culture. So these are the types of things that I want you to be aware of, that culture may manifest itself, or will manifest itself in these different ways that you may not have thought of before. So when you consider the diversity of human experience, you know, our living conditions, our working conditions, physical or even other disabilities. I was in a conference with one archivist who said, you know, when I was hired here, I was fully able. What's the term? Anyway, you know, she was no disabilities. And then since then, she lost strength in one arm. Well, that's kind of hard to lift 40-pound boxes. So, you know, this is the kind of thing that people treat her differently. She wasn't sure how she was going to ask for help or hide it. So there's all these types of things. And then when you look at cultural groups, remember these variations. So, and that more than one of these can be experienced by a single culture. So you could have somebody who's homeless, and this is a big problem in Hawaii because our society, this is such an expensive place to live, that you have a lot of people who are under housed, as they call it, and working. And so they don't have a steady place, or getting to work on time may be very difficult for them. And if you run your office, that, you know, you will be here at 7:45 and take a 45, not a 46-minute lunch, but, you know, and these things will have impact on some of these social or cultural groups. So there's two issues I just want to mention. When you get this slide deck, you'll have links to it. There's two issues of the Journal of Western Archives that I encourage you to look up at your leisure. One is a special issue done in 2019 on diversity, inclusion, and cultural competency. And the other one is on Native American archives. And even if you don't have those collections in your repository, what I encourage you to do is to look at that, just so that you can see how other cultures react to the traditional archival institution and some of their thoughts. Yesterday, I was in I think it was another ILMS grantee, the California, no, Asian, anyways, it was Asian librarians Chinese American Library Association. And so there was a very diverse, and of course, everybody was young enough to be, I have shoes older than them. And everybody was talking about that, this is the kind of oppression and this is the type of experience, and these kind of questions people ask us. And many times, I could identify being of mixed blood, but many times those were the things that we were not accustomed to expressing. And it's obvious they felt in a safe place so they could express it, but they're not necessarily going to express it to their employers. The more codified and structured, and the bigger the bureaucracy, nothing can be more bureaucratic than government, then that they may get so dissatisfied that they'll leave, or they will, or there's missed opportunities. They could have talked to their employers and said, well, have you considered doing it this way? Or should we consider that we are describing this collection wrong? So, or incomplete, I should say, or from only one viewpoint. So these are all missed opportunities. So when you look at this diversity of human experience, Anne and Lisa, we're going to go into a dyad, and we're going to put you into small groups for 7 minutes, so that you can share if you've been a victim of a recipient, I don't say victim, but a recipient of cultural stereotyping. And while I've been a victim of EEO violations, both for my gender and my ethnicity, recently I've been lumped together with older archivists who don't have the challenges of millennials, despite my earning significantly less than them. So I always think it's funny how millennials are like, where you older archivists don't have the student loan, or we don't have this and everything. It's like, yeah, you make 30% more than I do. So I think it's always interesting. And then yesterday, I was taken to task because I used a particular term in Hawaiian to describe myself. And one of the other archivists said, no, it wasn't archivists, it was librarians, said, well, you have no right to use that term because you don't have Hawaiian ancestry, and therefore you are, what do you call it? Appropriating the term, and I said, okay, well, consider it's a generational thing. I was brought up in a culture that's how I was referred to. And so you're going to take away 60 plus years of thinking of yourself that way, and now you're telling me I can't think of that way. So there's a cultural disconnect as well. There was a cultural destructiveness on his part. So, and he had Hawaiian blood, so he felt he was in his rights. So these are the kinds of examples I want you to consider. So I'm going to let you go ahead into your dyads, and anything at all. I had one participant tell me back in Boston, she said, oh, because I'm so overweight, when I go into clothing stores, the help don't even bother servicing me. So, anything at all. Okay, Anne?
Lisa's going to be putting everyone in groups right now. We'll have 7 minutes, and then we'll bring you back into the full group.
The rooms have been opened. You should be able to go into your rooms.
I want some feedback. What did you experience in your dyads?
So I just shared that I just shared my experience with my low vision. Alyssa, unfortunately, due to shared workspace, really couldn't talk, but we communicated through chat some. So so it was yeah, so just sharing about some of that. And as I mentioned, not the greatest example because I was born with low vision, so it's kind of become second nature to me. But yeah.
And then you've dealt with that your whole
Yep.
life.
Yes.
And what have you, not so much what have any lessons learned, but how do you normally respond to that when people?
My response is usually, because I get it so often, is just kind of in a way kind of have I've sort of have an answer ready, or in some ways kind of, whatever, or kind of shrug it off at this point.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't have a lot of it happening, because people don't necessarily ask a lot, but when it does, it's kind of like, oh, it's just another question, because I've had lots of, over the years too, a lot of, especially more so, as I was mentioning in a group a while back about, being a different kind of case and coming into eye doctors, and they have students, and let's go look at Alan. It's kind of become used to it. So
Is there anything that you would like people to understand about people with low vision?
I mean, that we can do a lot that, sometimes people don't think you can, but, and not everyone, but sometimes people say, oh, can you really do that? Or how do you do X, Y, Z? Well, it happens. So.
Okay. Thank you, Alan.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear from some other dyad. What was, did your partner share that you thought, I never thought of that before. I never thought of that stereotype. Or really? That, anybody heard something that surprised you by your partner? We can't ask Lisa because she's in a public, in a shared space.
I'll go, although it's not surprising. I was in a dyad with Shelley Thompson, and we talked about sexism and misogyny. I guess because, I'm getting ready to retire, and I'm thinking about working 40 years and how the workplace has changed. Like I told Shelley when I started work at the Kentucky State Archives, the people in the mailroom and the people at the record center were all, guys, and they had like these swimsuit calendars, and they would say things, and that kind of thing just doesn't happen anymore. But living through that and learning the change, that could, I saw these people change from, making remarks in the mailroom to, everybody had to go to sexual harassment training. We had to practice and learn how to talk to each other. And I saw that change so that, I don't think we would say like there's no sexism or misogyny, but that, we see the continuum, that there are improvements that you see that have been made over the decades when people realize that we've been handling things incorrectly, just like after George Floyd was killed, how we all became aware that we weren't as culturally competent, or as we just weren't doing what we should be doing. And that's why, there's so much work that we're doing in the archival profession now. Anyway, that was just, I guess, it wasn't surprising, but it was something that we see improving. So we know the work we're putting in now is eventually going to have, will have benefits in the future.
And that's, for those of us in that age group, Barbara, we certainly have seen that. And it's sometimes difficult to explain this to younger people, because that's what they grew up with. They grew up with this awareness, or that you just don't say those things. But they don't realize how hard we have to fight in order to get to this point. And so this is what I often find with a lot of cultures, and generational is culture too. But I find this in a lot of other cultures, with indigenous cultures, that they almost come with an assumption, and then you have to work with that assumption that is the way it should be. So without them, it's like the example I used about the young man who had an issue with me using a Hawaiian term. So these are things that, and the other part is that it still exists. Misogyny and all
Oh,
that
yeah.
still exists, but it's more subversive. And so that's the part that we have to watch out for. This is the thing that stereotyping continues. It continues. It comes into our heads like poof, nanosecond, right? And these are the types of things that we have to really pay attention to. Thank you, Barbara. Okay, one more from another dyad, please.
Is somewhat related to what you're talking about. We had, Melissa and I had conversations about a couple of different things. One that I talked about was having discussions with IT, which is like the inverse often of libraries and archives, in that where we are heavily white female dominated, they tend to be heavily male dominated. And going through the process repeatedly of when you have new IT staff come in, having to prove that although I'm not an IT specialist and they know far more than I do, I still know something, and we can still have conversations, and we still have needs that are specific to archives that may not be the standard of the majority of the clients they work in with state government. And having to do that over and over and over again, because just when you've had that conversation, everything is stable, staff changes over, and now you're having that same conversation again. And we also talked a little bit about having a few years in the profession and going from being very young and trying to have leading conversations with clients and with patrons, and having them defer to people who were older or male in those when we were leading them, and how maybe some of that has changed because we're now older, or maybe it's the culture has changed. It's hard to say from this standpoint in my life which it is, but it's certainly something that I think a lot of us, regardless of where we are in our careers, have experienced, because if you're not experiencing it now, you probably did when you started. Anyway.
Thank you, Ashley. That's really a good point, because there's actually, I just recently came across an article talking about how archivists can talk to IT. I'll find that and send it out as well too. But I just thought, because so much of our lives are doing that, especially for digital projects, right? And IT people have their own language. It's a culture, and they don't know what we do know or what we don't know. And then as far as the shifting as we age, or when we're dealing with different patrons, that's the part, especially with different patron groups. And I'm sure that all of you who've been in the profession any length of time has seen a shift or a evolution or changes in our patron groups. I know when I started going to the state archives 40 something years ago, it was me and some old white men. That was it. I was the only female, I was the only person of color. And now there's a much more diverse group in the reading room. So, and I'll share some stories about how you deal with the different dynamics of those different cultures as well. So thank you all for sharing that. And for those who didn't share, just, hopefully you'll get some ideas of how this is applicable to you, and just things to think about. So I want you to consider, these are the facets of cultural competency, and it requires cognitive, affective, and behavior components. And that's the problem. It's not just learning one and learning academically about a particular culture. Okay, I know how to deal with it. You cannot practice cultural competency without all three working together. So it's to develop any type of cross-cultural competency, it's necessary that each of us experience change in all three levels. So cultural empathy is another term that is being used. It's a multidimensional learned attribute requiring perspective taking, cultural self-other differentiation, and conveys understanding to others. So I would say that that is your behavior part. So at the hard part of cultural competency is being aware of yourself and your own culture, to realize many of your beliefs and actions are driven by your own background and your own experiences. So it requires you to be aware of others, typically others typically approach a same situation with different backgrounds and experiences, and that those often produce different perspectives. So this is just some of the things that it's not something we normally think about. We think we're all professionals, we're all in the archive profession. This is the way it's supposed to be, but it's not that way. So the cognitive part is that you will actively seek out various worldviews, which can help understand other cultures. And this is the part we're all busy, we're all tired. But this is the thing that you have to actually go out and do. And that's why the survey was sent out and says, you know, do you attend activities or have exposure to cultures unlike your own. So how would you go about doing this? Well, you can know your communities, and people will say, well, you know, we're the state archives. This is what we're supposed to do. We don't have to go out. We're not like a historical society or an academic archives. You know, we don't have to do that. But yes, you do, because how you service them, how you describe, what are your access points to your digital collection or to any of your collections, even if they haven't digitized yet. These are all going to make a difference in engagement. So, and even consider virtual communities. And how do you do this? I look at, when I go to a new city or a new place, I look straight at the editorial columns in the newspaper. To what's the community, what's on their mind? What's the areas of concern for them? Social media, of course. And so, and then look at your users. Do you take any kind of statistics on your users? I know that some online platforms will say, do you identify as, and or any give you the option, prefer not to answer as well. But consider the different facets of your communities. What are their resources? What are the types of organizations that they're in? And then often I put the example of the Chinese residents relocating to Vancouver, because often we automatically categorize immigrants as disadvantaged and, you know, lower socioeconomic. And in this case, not the situation. You know, they changed the whole fabric of the real estate market in Vancouver and so on. And they had different wants and different needs than, and some similar to lower socioeconomic immigrants, you know, like how to navigate their new residents, how to navigate their new country, and all these types of things. So know your communities. And this is an opportunity. This is what has been talked about, but consider, you know, what I mentioned earlier is that, but consider the impact that your records have. So this is something that has recently, other cultures, not your traditional users, but have been become aware of, that these are things that can help them in their lives, in the reasons that they're looking for information, can include things that are in your collection. And so consider how these impact different cultures as well. So the other thing that I want you to be aware of, the other part, are your attitudes. So consider that, okay, so you appreciate and value the differences between your own experiences and your upbringing and your professional experiences and that of your broader community. So this is the part that is very difficult to do if you remain in your own silo and continue with the same people, the same exposure, that you're not going to be able to see what is it that the broader community that you service, in your case, the entire state, may be concerned about, may be looking for resources. And if you don't broaden that, you say, oh, we have this record group can answer that. These are the types of things. And then how are you going to, well, that's their problem. They don't know to come to us. It's attitude. So consider checking on those. So just like a fish out of water, we're not aware of our own culture unless we are taken out of it. So, or exposed to another culture. So these are the things that I want you to, it's very easy for us to get into a routine that we're very comfortable with our professional or personal cultures. And this is the way we've always done it. And this is the way we're going to do it. That's not achieving our goals. So we often label things that we don't understand as weird or wrong. And that it's not always our acknowledging our cultural differences shouldn't paralyze you. You shouldn't say, be so afraid that you're going to offend somebody. So be sure that you realize the difference between your intent and the impact of your behavior. And I'll share a very personal experience. When I had signed a particular petition, I didn't think about, first of all, full disclosure, I didn't even look at the people involved. I just went, oh, good idea, boom, sign. And that I didn't think about the impact of my behavior on the people involved. So what I want you to also consider is that how do you assign status or level of importance to people? And this is something that I see happen quite often in bureaucracies, is that of course, we're going to deal with the person who has the higher status, but then recognize what the people without that bureaucratic status can contribute to the goals of diversity and inclusion and access, because they will have knowledge that you may not have, that you probably don't have, because their experiences are different. Maybe they're the first line of contact with the patrons. Maybe they're the ones working with the different state units to determine the transfer of records. Maybe they're the ones that, how are they speaking about you when you're the decision maker or you're the one who does the appraisal? So consider all of these things. And then if something is negative, I mean, if you're a negative reaction, stop, do that rubber band on the wrist thing. Why am I responding to this? Why am I responding to this in a negative way? So something that I also want you to be aware of is that often we know intellectually, you know, the differences, and then, but our behavior comes across differently. So sensitivity to a social group's differences and acknowledge the variability of these. Do you interact differently with this particular group or this particular person because they come from a different culture than you? And some people say, no, I treat everybody the same. Everybody, I'm equal to everybody. Well, that's not culturally competent, because maybe treating this person the same as you would this person from this culture is inappropriate. I want to give you an example. I had a director who invited the leader, in this case, the dean of the Hawaiian language school. She said, come to my office. I'm going to talk to you. And she asked me to come along because I was a Hawaiian collection librarian. And she proceeded to tell him everything about what the library could do for him. never gave him a chance to speak, never gave him a chance to listen, to express what they may need. And it was a waste of both their times because she was busy bombarding him with how wonderful the library is and never listening to hear what is it that they're struggling with. Do they have students that need or patrons that need access in different formats or access to primary resources or what have you, never listening. And it was very difficult to watch this total miscommunication, not miscommunication, but inappropriate way of dealing with this particular dean. So one would say, well, he's a dean. They all know, they all work the same way in academia. No, everybody has a different culture. And he was representing the Hawaiian department. So this unfortunately happens too often. And this is something that I want to warn you against. I'm hoping you can all read this, but just learning a few terms or learning about one particular culture and makes you think that, oh, I am culturally competent. And I see this happen so often in Hawaii. I'm sorry to use Hawaii as an example. It's the only place I've lived and worked. But as diverse as we are, this happens. I see it all the time. People come here and they've read about it and they actually say to us, oh, I know all about your struggles. No, you don't. Or I know these Hawaiian words. I took 2 semesters of Hawaiian language. I know all about your culture. No, you don't. Okay. So this is just something that I want you to be aware of. So how can these be integrated, the 3, the affective, cognitive, and behavioral? How can these be integrated into your cross-cultural interactions? When you look at these, oftentimes I have known archivists who give the same, they give a presentation. They say, oh, this is the other thing. They say, oh, we did outreach to this disadvantaged or underrepresented group. That's cultural competency. No, it's not. Okay, just giving outreach doesn't tell me how you interacted with them. If you have the audacity to tell a group about these records in your collection and the significance to their culture, that is not cultural competency, okay? Working with one particular group and you assume that you know all about the others, like one Native American group with all the others, no. And last cohort, we had somebody who said, oh yeah, I was working with another Native American archivist and we actually found out that we had very different privacy issues regarding, what was appropriate for women to see and what was not. So even within the culture of Native American, there are differences. And what I can't stand is giving the same presentation to all cultures. I took a group of Hawaiians in to see a collection, and the archivist said, oh, and look, here's a letter from Abraham Lincoln. Look, isn't this cool? And afterwards she came out and she said, why did you show us that? I don't care. I came in to see about the records in there that regarding impacts to our culture, land and rights and everything like that. I don't care that you have a letter signed by Abraham Lincoln. So, and then the other thing too is that when you're interviewing, when you're working, when your interpersonal relationship, that you may consider like they didn't make eye contact. This is just one example, that they're not forthright. Maybe in their culture, it's rude to make eye contact with somebody who is your quote superior or has power over you. It's a sign of bravado that you don't want to express. So these are the types of things that I want you to consider as nuances in cultural competency. So this is a continuum, and I've received criticism that people say, well, they don't like cultural competency because it makes the assumption that you can be culturally competent, that you have the proficiency, and so they prefer cultural empathy. But I would say that cultural proficiency changes with every different culture you're working with. So you can never really get cultural proficiency with all cultures. So when you consider at the bottom of the continuum, that you would make a conscious effort to destroy other cultures and that are different from your own or from what you think will work best with others. And this is, I think, very common in bureaucracies, is that if they don't do it our way, then there's the highway. Or the incapacity is that I'm unwilling or to be helpful to other cultures. We take care of our own. And that is also something that you can see in bureaucracies. This is the way we do it. They're going to have to adhere to us. Or then denial. All people are the same. I mean, this is something that I hear all the time. There's a denial of polarization. There's a monocultural mindset that we're all Americans, but it's denying that we experience differences, and it's very simplistic, and it precludes us from creating any inclusive culture activities where we understand and respect both similarities and differences. Too often, if we don't want to respect differences, then we deny it. Okay, so then there is pre-competence where you're trying to understand, but there's a minimization, like in the interviewing example. What scares me is that often you have nice written policies. Our policy is to be inclusive, to service patrons and, deliver service with awareness, but limited actions. And that's why I don't like it when you have a top-down type of approach, because if you don't work with the individuals and teach them about what cultural competency, how it exemplifies itself in action, and just have a top-down policy that says we will be diverse, we will be inclusive, we will be it doesn't work. And then, of course, what you want to aim for is that you have a commitment to social and economic justice, foster mutual adaptation to differences to create environments that are beneficial for all. So when I say that, I mean, having, to the best of your ability, flexibility for different cultural concerns. I travel every week inter-island, and so I'm at airports all the time, and I thought it was really interesting. You see more and more people traveling with service animals, and now airports are having places for the service animals to relieve themselves. That's an awareness. So do you have things like that? Do you have a place for nursing mothers to express milk if they can't nurse the baby right there? Do you have rooms, areas in your reading room where cultures who we come into your reading room and want to work in a collective rather than individually, so that they can do that work without disturbing your other patrons? These are all recognition and adaptation to include these different cultural styles. And then proficiency is when you hold other cultures unlike your own in high esteem, and your organizing frame of reference and the foundation of which you understand relationships between individuals, groups, organizations, systems, us in IT, and that they are optimal, universal, and inclusive, and proficient. So that's just one way of looking at it. And so this is the levels. You have to start off with your self-reflection, your personal awareness and understanding, and it goes up into the organization. So this is another way of showing it. I like to put different ways of showing because people, different things resonate with people. So you can look at the stages, or you can break it down even broader to micro, your individual, your meso, with their ability to communicate effectively and work within different environments, and then at the organizational. So at the individual level, obtaining cultural knowledge increases the capacity for cultural awareness and understanding, both of yourself and of others. And then effective relationships at the interpersonal level is because participants practice skills based on expanded cultural knowledge that they got in the micro level. And then the organizational level, the system level promote organization-wide cultural competence that can be implemented through strategic action planning devised by input by all employees, not just your highest level, because it's the all levels of employees that will say, you know, I really need flexible hours, or I really need a place to pray 5 times a day, or I really need X, Y, and Z. So these are the types of things that I'd like to encourage you. So it is an active process. It's exhausting. I have to admit this, because you are all, it's a formative, anything that's formative is ongoing. It's going to be place you in an uncomfortable position oftentimes. And then acquiring this competence is a continuing and an intentional process. It starts off with a rudimentary understanding on the concept of diversity. From there, a person needs to actively acquire the knowledge that they need to refine your own behavior and to contribute to a climate more supportive of diversity, and then identify the means by which to do this. So because it's an active process, it's going to be messy. It's going to include messy elements, exploring your own assumptions, your own values and expectations of your workers, your patrons, the IT department, all of these things. But what I encourage you to use is to employ an EMIC rather than an ETIC approach. And this is the part that often, that's what I have a hard time with people who study a different culture and then do it for 6 months or, you know, whatever. And then they go, okay, here's my paper, I wrote about it. And then we are trying to learn about it. We go to that paper and say, okay, now I know about this culture. No, you don't. That was just the introduction. I would go to the culture itself, go to those particular, group that represents this new group, immigrant group. Go to these people who are fighting City Hall because of this particular area that's being demolished or they're being displaced. Go straight to them. And be wary of cultural appropriation. So oftentimes I see policies employing cultural words or concepts without the approval of said culture. And that is very offensive to that particular culture. So this is something that I oftentimes they, especially in the islands, you know, they throw in a few Hawaiian words and they go, oh, we live by these values, and like, nothing in your, and then you continue the same policies and so on, and it doesn't help you. It doesn't help the organization. It doesn't help the cultures. It doesn't help diversity. So these are the types of things I want you to consider. So again, at the personal level, it does change. And so it changes who you interact with. And the thing is, especially in bureaucracies, that we expect people coming from very different cultural backgrounds to conform, to acculturate into our bureaucracy, our infrastructure. And we don't accept the differences that they come with, and we want them, and so we lose out. We lose out on what they could have added, the value they could have added to our records, our access to outreach, to how we describe them, on and on and on. So because culture is so personal, what I want to share with you is consider your own, right? I keep honing in that you got to start with yourself. And so consider your own multicultural identifiers. And so with the fact that I take care of aged parents and aged spouse, he just had a mini stroke Tuesday, Monday, and you know, that flexibility is something that I need to address, taking care of my parents and so on. And I hope that my employer will recognize those needs. In my society, in my culture, the fact that I didn't go to a private school, it makes a big difference. People will make assumptions about who I am, my level of knowledge or intelligence even. And I put certified archivist because while many people in our profession don't believe in certification, it has helped me, especially working with non-professionals or people out in other professions, understand what an archivist is and what they should be aware of. So these are some of the cultural identifiers that I have. And what I'd like to do is for you to list at least 3 of cultural identifiers that you identify the most with, and then select one that, and then consider what maybe people might misunderstand about you. So for instance, I identify as a Republican, but I am not a right, what's the term I was thinking of? I am not a right wing.
Alt-right?
The ultra right, thank you. Yeah. So, something like that. Or any of those. So for instance, I would say, I am a woman of color, but I am not a first generation. Somebody actually says, oh, you're the first generation college graduate. No, I actually know my mom has a master's. So, those types of things. So these are the kind of identifiers I'd encourage you. And so we're going to take, I would say, 5 minutes to do this and to meet in your dyads and discuss it. And then we'll have a short discussion when we come back. Okay, so we can go ahead and put everyone in dyads and they can list their 3 identifiers. You put your camera on again if you can, if your bandwidth can handle that. And then I wanted to ask, some feedback from the dyads. One thing is that, has your personal identity changed over the years? And how do you expect it to change in the coming years? So anything that you shared in the dyad that you hadn't really thought of previously as defining of who you are, or the fact that that sentence, that I am this, but I am not necessarily that. Either something that you shared because you thought of it in a different way, or that your partner shared that you guys kind of went, oh, I never thought of that before.
Hi, Helen, it's Lizette Pelletier.
Hello.
Yes, so Joy and I were in a group, and we talked about being first generation college graduates in our families. And one thing when realizing that is neither my father never went to college. My mother attended school. I think she was in her 3rd year, and had a panic about being successful in that capacity, and accepted my father's marriage proposal and never finished school. And now she regretted it later on that she never finished it. She didn't wait to get married till after. So that was always a pressing point with her that my 2 sisters and 2 brothers and I, we needed to go to college and get an education. And that was very important. And my father, it's I didn't mention this with Joy, but my father was always, you know, if you need a certification for anything, if you want to get your CRM, if you want to get your CA, I'll pay for it, and stuff, because it was very important to him. And he also got upset because my alma mater, even though I notified them that I'd gotten the job as state archivist, they never put anything in the newsletter, which he gets because he's a donor. And he's like, didn't you ever tell them that? And I said, yes, I told them, but I told them once, but it's not a big deal to me. But yeah, and for me, it's not so critical for my kids to, I want them to have an education, but it doesn't have to be a college education, and it doesn't have to be, they don't have to have masters and PhDs, so so
That's very,
how I relate.
first of all, I think our fathers were our brothers from a different winner. Because there's the recognition, it's all about, in Chinese family, it's all about recognition, so why didn't they recognize you? But to take that to a cultural level, for instance, the fact that in my culture, if you have that college degree, you're automatically set for success. And so there, many cultures will say, and you've seen Chinese comedians talk about this, it's like, you must be a doctor or a lawyer, you must be. And so that same onus on a person. And to this day, I still feel in many ways as like a failure, because my best friend is an attorney. And she goes, your father loves me more than he loves you. Because and so I went, yeah, I know. So, but I mean, that's a cultural thing, so in your case, it's a personal identifier, but consider that in many cultures, that's a standard, if you're, and my mother still to this day will ask my daughter's a stewardess, by the way. And thank God she is, because that's how I get to work every week, because I fly free standby. And my mother will always say, well, is so-and-so a professional? Are they a professional? And my daughter loses it. She's finally said, Grandma, I'm a professional juice server. Okay. so, that's the thing, is that in many cultures, taking that college degree or that level of academic accomplishment, that is, it has a lot to do with that. And so you may have somebody who works for you who may come with that identification in their head and may react differently to, maybe they want to speak out about what they see something as an injustice, or they want to speak out about a different way of expanding diversity, but they may have that in their head, is that, well, I don't have a college degree, therefore, and this person does, and they have a master's or PhD, and I don't have the right to voice my opinion. That's the kind of stuff that I want you to be clued into, and make space for those people to have the freedom and the welcoming attitude, so that you can, because they're going to see things in your collections and the use of your collections that you may not have seen. Thank you so much. Okay, one more.
Hi, I'll go. I realized that being a Gen Xer is a huge part of my identity, more than like I thought, right? Because how do I want to explain that? The social, the economic, the political, environment that you're raised in and you experience and everything. But there's also kind of there's something I think funny about Gen Xers, and that we're like the Jan Brady of between the millennials and the boomers, or like, we're, hey guys, we're here. And I love that the Jan Brady thing is also very specific.
And the fact
Pop
that you
culture related.
utilize that as an example.
Yes, exactly. So, and also too, like what that means to me with what phase of life I'm in, right? Like I'm at this point where I'm taking care of aging parents and a teenager. And so, and I'm, my body's falling apart at the same time, right? So like figuring all of that dynamic out. Yeah, just plus like we had really good music. We just had really good music.
Okay, well, there's a cultural difference there. So, but see, that's the other thing too, is that, so Melissa, that's going to change, right? You can expect that your identification is going to change as Gen Xers go on, but then also consider how you interact with those of us who are baby boomers, those who are millennials, and those, and so on. And so, how you might communicate differently with them, and how you're there. So for instance, my son, who's 29, and he says, he's starting his new career as an urban and regional planner. And he says, well, I don't know if I want to stay at this company. There's no work-life balance. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Who are you starting your career to expect a work-life balance? You bust your butt right now, buddy boy. This is the time you bust you're single, you don't have any responsibilities, you bust your butt. And I have to hold myself back and go, oh yeah, his generation believes in work-life balance, what a concept. At his age, I was working 3 jobs, so this is something that we have to take into account. So thank you all both of you. Instead of calling on somebody, well, I'll go ahead and share my screen so that we can go on, because this is the nitty gritty of, okay, here we go. So the impact of cultural values on yourself. So when you consider that these cultural values, neither of those examples were restrictive, but consider that it could be, and maybe they're a little too personal for you to share in a group, is that you may have a cultural belief that kind of limits you. For many years, I was limited because, I can't be an XYZ. I can't be a this because I didn't go to private school, or I can't be this because I'm a woman of color or whatever. So consider those types of things as well. So in an organization, especially, what often happens is that we expect others to be like us because they joined our organization. Okay. But they're not. And then something happens, a cultural incident happens. Maybe something that came up recently in an institution was somebody was up for promotion, and everybody in the organization knew she was not great, and she got the promotion. And so somebody went to the head of the committee and says, why did you give her a promotion? And they said, well, we didn't hear anything written. We didn't receive any writings saying anything against it. And the person who questioned says, you've been hearing for the past 5 years why this person is not well respected. So in the infrastructure, in the bureaucracy, they were expecting one way to receive feedback, and they were not open to the other ways, other avenues of receiving feedback. And I understand it's all about documenting. I remember when I had a issue with a clerk at the front desk at the State Archives, and her supervisor said, I've been trying to get her out of here, but I need documentation. Please document. So I understand that works in State Archives, but consider other avenues as well. And listen to that, even to the point where the people who have not responded in the normal ways that are called for by your institution, at least give them an opening and then you can nurture them to submit in the authorized way of submitting feedback. So something happens, and then it causes a reaction, and it can be uncertainty, it can be indignation, whatever it is. So what often happens is it's usually followed by a false attribution, a stereotype, and then we withdraw, because you're like, oh, that's the way they are, or that's the way all millennials are, they just think about themselves or what have you. And then there's just a further chasm created. But if we are aware of our reaction, that was a knee-jerk reaction, and then we reflect on its cause. Is it because it was from some stereotype? Is it from something that was told to you early on in your career or in your formative years, that this particular culture is always going to act this way, all of them act this way, or what have you, okay? But if you reflect on why you reacted that way, and then the reaction subsides, then you can observe and decode the differences in the culture. And then you can develop an appropriate expectation. So recognize the culture. It's a cultural adjustment. So there's different ways of approaching cultural competency, and this is the one that I think is most universal. And so it includes these 4 skills. And don't forget, you're all going to get this this PowerPoint after this session, so don't freak out that I'm going so fast. So these are the 4 skills, and the outcomes that you're looking for on the first one is that you're going to be mindful. You're going to be have an inquiry set way of looking at things rather than making assumptions. So, for example, preferring to some of your employees, and this is sad in our profession and many white collar professions, is that we not recognize, but we reward people who present to large groups, okay? Or write for a peer-reviewed journal or something like that. And often you may have employees that work better or prefer working with small groups than presenting to a large group, or they write for a local paper. And they actually are going to get more of the community or cultures that you want to service, that you want to increase service to, or encourage to join your group or join your workforce or something like that. So this is recognizing that different people have different ways of expressing themselves to show their professionalism. It's just that we're so locked into the Western way of what we conceive as professional activity. It's so dogmatic that we don't accommodate for other ways. And sometimes those people are much more effective. So this is what happens usually, is that you have this conformity. And I want to share something with the stage 1. There was a 2017 article called The Role of Chinese American Librarians in Library and Information Science Diversity. And they actually counseled Chinese American librarians to adopt Western characteristics. And I thought, oh my gosh, really? So we have to be more Western or be more forward. It's not who we are, but we have to do that in order to succeed in the profession. Or another thing is resistance is, I haven't heard any complaints, so we don't have an issue. No, you haven't heard any complaints, but I definitely can tell you, if you have, unless you have a homogeneous workforce and nothing is as homogeneous as you think it is, there are going to be complaints. They're just not in reaching your ears. So these are the stages that usually occur in awareness. So consider that culture is multidimensional, and the facets that you have to consider when you're dealing with people unlike yourself Okay, so for instance, history comes into play. So for instance, my father was in insurance, and he said, oh, the Filipinos prefer working with me over the Japanese agents because of what happened during World War II. I'm thinking, really? There, but even if the people you're dealing with didn't experience it themselves, they heard stories from their families like, oh, don't trust these people, they're gonna screw you over every time, or don't do this, or this group will do this. So consider history. Social status factors, do certain people have a house on the Cape, and you don't, so therefore, we're not going to interact with you, or you're not on the in group, or an invitation to get together outside of work. Some people don't have that flexibility. It doesn't mean that and that's another thing, is that we're very big on that, and some cultures will think if we weren't invited, therefore we're not valued, or they can't participate because of external, non-work responsibilities. And so these are the types of things that I want you to be aware of, that some people may have that flexibility and some may not. Family versus profession first. This is something that has occurred. I had a student who was pure Hawaiian, and there's an island in Hawaii, Niihau, that it's the only privately owned island. And no matter what Ellison tells you about Lanai, he doesn't own the entire island, but Niihau does own the entire island. The Robinson family owns the entire, and they have only pure Hawaiians live there. Well, many of them live on Kauai for school and work and such. And so I had this girl, undergraduate, who was an intern when I was with the Historical Society. And I knew she did not have a cell phone. I knew she caught the bus from the college to our office. And one day she just didn't show up for work. And so I thought, ooh, that's concerning, I don't know what's happening. And then the next time she didn't show up for work. And so I was really getting concerned. And when she did show up, I said, are you okay? Is everything? She goes, oh yeah, my auntie wanted me to help her. And I'm not going to get on her case because she didn't tell me. In her value, in her family system, family comes first. It's no question. You don't say, oh no, I can't help you, auntie, I have to go to work. It's automatic. Okay. So this is the kind of thing that I just said, okay, I totally understand that. But in case that happens again, let me know. Call me from home, or, because I know she didn't have a computer at home. She's not going to email me. But, let me know, because I was worried about you. So those are the kinds of things. So, and then all these different facets, caring for the others. I have to share one. When I was with the Park Service, a Filipina worker and her boss were in the office, and the boss is white, and she said, what are you eating? And she said, oh, it's this dish, she called the Filipino name of this. And her boss says, well, it looks like dog barf to me. So this is the kind of stuff that I want you to be aware of. I'll give you a few other examples later. But by doing this, consider these different aspects of interpersonal cultures, differences, the loudness, the directness. Sometimes we expect people to be direct and they're not going to be direct. The nonverbal. So all of these types of things are come into play. And I actually, in 2019, we did a multi-generational session at SAA. And one of the participants said, I'm younger than most of the people in my office, and they take such offense at my shoes, because she wears very expensive sports shoes. And she said, to them, I'm not a professional. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. They focus in on that. And so, they would not include her in certain decision making. And that's something that really has no bearing I work with younger people. Of course, everyone's younger than me, but the fact that I wear jewelry and I feel like I should wear, in my culture, it was very, you should look professional. Right? You should be wearing nylons. Remember, most of us remember those days. And they're very casual. So, that's not it's just a different in our culture. So when you consider all that, I'm not going to have you go into diet, but just consider, now that you can think about what I've covered, some examples that I've used, when you look back at the cultural iceberg, then think about some of your previous interactions with other cultures. Now that you consider that certain things that you might have interpreted as they're wrong or they're not conforming or whatever, maybe if you had considered that, would you have responded, that it was a cultural things, would you have responded differently? So those are the types of things that I want you to spend some thought on the next week before we join together. So skill number 2 are the 6B are the barriers. So often a barrier can be language, it can be the nonverbal, definitely the stereotypes, or overgeneralizing, and then the negative thoughts. And then this is the other thing that I think that we often forget about is stress. Sometimes we are just so stressed, and it's useful to examine the levels, I say layers here, but the levels of stress that you're dealing with. And seeing if something can be removed. Sometimes it can be just a change of venue. And then oftentimes, and I think more so in COSA than any place else, are organization and institution-wide barriers. So you may want to do things differently, but you have an organization mandate that it's done this way. So you're going to have to either investigate methods of addressing it in other ways or working at changing those barriers. So this is something that I hope we'll consider, and this is a lot of it. It's both personal and organization. You can tell the only recreational reading I have is the New Yorker because I keep using examples from there. But this is an example of how a Western point of view, an American point of view, is a certain way and it impacts our business, our profession. And so this is why people say, oh, let's go go out for drinks, or we're going golf, let's golf, or, they're trying to find things that make them identify commonalities. And whereas the Chinese business person they don't give a rip about commonalities. They just want to make sure that if you're hurt, if you won't mess with their operations. And so this is just an example of how two different cultures deal doing business. So within the state government, you may have a department head who has one way of conducting business, and you have a different way of conducting business, and you can't figure out, why aren't they sending their records to us? Why won't they let us do a transfer? Why won't they let us do a records retention schedule for them? Whatever it is. These are the types of things that you have to be aware may exist. So the third and fourth skills are to actually practice, right? The behavioral, and then see if you can design and implement organization-wide cultural competence. So the outcomes of doing this will be effective communication and better problem solving. You'll have you have different ways of conflict recovery. Oftentimes that's left up to us, so you can nip it in the bud so it doesn't have to reach the levels of state conflict recovery or negotiations. If you can address cultural differences early on, you won't escalate up. Consider level coaching and mentoring and teamwork. I am always saddened by how bureaucracies keep stratas that only this level of people interact with each other or make decisions. I was with a private school. It's the largest private landowner in the state, so they got billions. And in their 125-year history, no paraprofessionals had been sent to professional development. And I was like, are you kidding me? So I sent my assistant to mainland professional development, which is no small cost. But I just amazed that why aren't we valuing our paraprofessionals as much as our professionals? So these are the types of things that I encourage you to take a look at. So in order to practice culturally centered communication, I bold number 7, because this is something that I think that most people are not practicing. And like I said, I commute on the plane every week. So of course there's a lot of tourists on the plane, and the island way of disembarking is that people in the first row will get off first, and then everyone will wait for those rows to disembark. And all the time I'll see somebody from someplace else jump up and rush to the front and then get frustrated that people aren't letting them through, because the American way is to look out for yourself and run to the front and take your, and the local way is for everybody to wait their turn. And I've actually heard people say, I don't know why people aren't moving. And so it gets to the point where I've actually turned to people and said, it's the first time here. The protocol here is to let the rows in front of you. So it's just that awareness, just observe attentively. And somebody who his first time attending ATOM, the Association of Tribal Archives and Libraries Museums, was told, just watch, don't speak. Because we're so like, oh, I can help you with this. Oh, I can, especially as professionals, when we do community outreach, when we work with organizations or cultures that don't have our level of professionalism, we're just so busy to tell them what we can do for them, like that library director, that we're not watching and we're not sitting back. So I would say that's observe attentively. So these are watch your perception management, try to be as cosmopolitan, inquisitive, have an interest in flexibility, and practice that non-judgmentalness and judgmentalness. And then this is hard, tolerate ambiguity. So many times we don't like, it's stressful to be uncertain, but until you can get more information, preferably from the culture itself, be comfortable with sitting with that. Practice emotional resilience. When that's that young, I want to say student, but he's not a student, but with that younger librarian, called me to task for using a Hawaiian term, I started emailing him a text, in the chat directly, and says, well, I knew these people and I experienced this, and I'm going to, and listing my credentials to this person. And I was like, I don't need to prove myself to him. I'm going to be resilient, not let this get to me. So, these are the kind of things that, don't take it as a personal attack right off the bat, and keep a sense of humor, which is easier said than done. So often this takes place. It requires situational learning. And there's 2 ways, there's an ethnography of communication. It's a certain approach. You can look it up if you want to, or you can ask me further on down the line. if you want to explore this. But one of the pre-readings, Indigenous Knowledge and Cultural Competency in the Library Profession, utilizes Indigenous knowledge as a framework, and which is applicable to the learning objective of recognize where cultural mindedness can be employed with cultural centered communication skills. So this is something that can be used to form a foundation for contributing to culturally competent organizations, communities, and societies. And this is much more appropriate than just saying, just throwing a few words out there and saying, oh, we're culturally competent. We do outreach or what have you. That's not, you have to consider the ethnography of that particular culture and situational learning as well. So this is some of the, especially in the digital realm, those who may lack knowledge of newer technologies can be easily intimidated and believe that the learning curve is too great for them to adopt. So you can provide non-threatening or non-demeaning ways to provide training. So this is something that is very important face-to-face and can be transferred to the digital realm as well. So consider you're always self-questioning and learning about processes as well, both of your own culture and then of the cultures that you're working with. And of course, the observation, use the observation and then develop these personal qualities. So what I'm going to share with you, and you're going to have the week to look at this, and you have the link in the chat box, is that this is a scenario that I developed when I was with the Archives Leadership Institute. And it shows examples of cultural destructiveness, the whole continuum. And what I'd like you to do is to consider the different skills that have been covered. Skill 1, understand culture as a multi-level and multi-dimensional. Skill 2, understands the 6 barriers to effective relationships. 3, practice culturally centered communications. And 4, design and implement organization-wide cultural competence. So which of the 4 skills can be used to analyze the scenario? And I have to warn you that the scenario, when you click on the link, it's on YouTube. It looks funky because it was filmed to be using those virtual reality glasses, headsets, whatever you call them, because that's what Purdue was all about, virtual reality. Like we all have virtual reality sets in our archives. But anyway, the content is good. And it will show you examples of the continuum and how the archivist was able to switch the cultural competency adeptness and level in this scenario, working with a particular culture. So stop share. Okay. And then I'm going to open it up for any questions. Oh, there, Melissa, there you are. You were there. But you weren't in my group though, Melissa.
No, I made a different video.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, that was the last time they had it in person. So so are there any questions before we let you free? Okay. Hearing none, I'm going to let you have a few minutes to yourself. You'll be receiving this PowerPoint with the links, and then you can, the hyperlink to the scenario is there as well. And I'll see you all next week. Same time, same station. Okay. Aloha.
Mahalo, Helen.
Thank you.